My name is Chelsea Roy, and the topic of my paper are flipped classrooms. So it's titled Flipped Effects: How Flipped Classrooms Affect Student Learning. The driving question behind my paper, the biggest one, what is a flipped classroom and what effect does it have on student learning in comparison with a traditional classroom? So you'll see four main points here. We have the definition, so what exactly is a flipped classroom according to literature? A comparison between a flipped classroom and a traditional classroom. The general effects, so what did research present in its findings of the effects on student learning in a flipped classroom? And the pros and cons. You've got to weigh what are the pros, what are the cons. Behind all of this, my main point of choosing this topic for my paper was because I hope to flip my classes. I teach Latin at a high school level. I have grades 9 through 12. And what I'm hoping is not doing all four levels. I have 1, 2, 3, and AP. But instead, starting with level 1 this year and flipping that class and then kind of following that level 1 as they progress all the way to AP. So hopefully in 4 years, I'll have a little bit of a better grasp on the flipped classrooms. So by definition, what is a flipped classroom? It is focused on active learning where concepts are applied and knowledge is integrated through group work and problem solving. Some big hitters in this definition: active learning shows up a lot in literature when talking about flipped classrooms. An increase in collaboration and student-centered learning with less emphasis on the role of the teacher. Another big point in most of the definitions that you'll read about flipped classrooms. Instead of being teacher-centered, we're now learner or student-centered, which plays into that active learning role that we just talked about. A flipped classroom is based on the principle that homework is better done in class with assistance from the instructor, whereas lectures are better completed at the student's own pace outside of the classroom. This definition in particular really hit home with me as a language teacher. I don't give homework often because I know that it's going to be really difficult for them to do with the lack of resources, especially for Latin. So for me, recording a lecture that I was going to give in class anyways and letting them take it home and work through it on their own time, and then coming into class and actually applying what they watched, that would be awesome. It would be so much better than just not doing homework for the purpose that they can't do it. And then the last part here, as students are supposed to come to the classroom after they watch the videos at home or wherever they want, they spend the class time to discuss the points they don't understand with their teachers and with other students. They do more activities which enable their understanding the topic better. Again, I think this is a big hitter. It's about them taking responsibility, doing the lectures, whatever it is, the learning at home, and then bringing it in and taking it to that higher level thinking while they're in the classroom. So here's a comparison. How does a flipped classroom compare to a traditional one? And you can see the two here, pretty simple. A traditional classroom is teacher-centered. It has the student as a passive learner, and it has the instruction of content in class with the application of content out of class. And if you just flip those all around, that's how you get to a flipped classroom. Instead of the teacher being the main focus, it's now student-centered, they're active learners, and the instruction is now out of class with the application being in class. I thought this was a really interesting statistic. Nearly 60% of the classroom time in schools in the United States is still dedicated to direct instruction. That's a lot of classroom time. I wrote in my paper, could you imagine if we took that 60% of classroom time and dedicated it to the application instead of the lectures or the bland note-taking or the PowerPoint presentation that we're, struggling to keep kids involved in anyways? Could you imagine if we put that 60% towards application, towards synthesis, taking it above and beyond the comprehension? What a classroom could look like. General effects. What did research present in its findings of the effects on student learning by a flipped classroom? So we don't need to read through all of these, but to hit on the main points: greater levels of engagement, statistically significant average achievement scores in comparison with those in traditional classrooms. Students liked it better, they could learn at their own pace, there was flexibility. They reported an 85% higher level of satisfaction. So all those things, really great pros, really push someone towards wanting to flip their classroom. And then over here on the right, students not only appreciated the teaching more, but found that they had, this is super important, a better grasp on their approach to the course and how they learned. So we have metacognition now. We have students thinking about how they're thinking. They're thinking about how they're learning. When we flip the classroom and put the responsibility on them to learn instead of having the responsibility on us as teachers to present that information. So I really liked that quote a lot, especially the how they learned part. Pros and cons. I tried to keep them pretty toned down here. The pros, a flipped classroom is student-centered, we've talked about. Organization, it offers them kind of time and space to learn on their own and organize their thoughts, which for some of our students, they really need that extra time to think things through and organize exactly what they want to say. They don't do well with the on-the-spot answers in class. And so this gives those students a little bit more of a personalized experience there. Responsibility, number 3. With critical thinking and metacognition involved, a student automatically becomes more responsible for his or her own learning process. This is what we kind of touched on in the last slide. And number 4, I think this is really important, interventions. And so this applies across all the academic bands. This includes, the AP students, this includes the IEP students. But a pro of the flipped classroom, it provides additional information. It lets teachers clear up misconceptions. We as teachers play the mediator role to resolve conflict between people. We ensure that group members have a chance to elaborate his or her own view on the issue. All of these different interventions. And not on here, but included in my paper, is also differentiation, which is super important across any classroom. Being able to tailor learning to specific student needs based on where they're at with the content. And just like every new idea, there are cons to this. Student anxieties being one, and I'm sure that you can think of students right off the top of your head that would be super anxious about not having direct teacher instruction because that's just their norm. There's a lack of research, and this kind of touches on a few things. So summarizing what it says here, the research done has looked at how the processes of learning and the knowledge construction have succeeded. It just hasn't really been able to explain why. There hasn't been enough research into why a flipped classroom works, just that it does. Another lack of research point is that when I ran into my research problems, most of the flipped classrooms are quantitative classrooms. They're math classrooms, they're science classrooms, and they're STEM classrooms. But as a social science, as a humanities course, there wasn't really as much information on the effects of a flipped classroom in those subject areas, which is really interesting to see. And then the last con here, unprepared, and that's referring to the teachers. So teachers who go into flipped classrooms, according to the research, without adequate preparation and knowledge of the topic, are more likely to abandon the idea, which totally makes sense. You start something, you get in over your head, and the next thing you know, you're in the third 9 weeks and you've lost complete control. We've all been there, and if not, then I'll take that one for the team and say that's just me. But you can see how that would be a con. And so this is actually my conclusion from my paper. The first quote here, flipped learning is connected to constructivism, in which learners do not accept the given information without using their own experiences to comment on the information. So by accepting that theory of constructivism as a good starting point to where to begin a flipped classroom, we as educators can begin the transformational change that's being demanded in the field of education. Instead of spending precious classroom time in direct instruction, teachers can impress upon students the importance of constructing their own knowledge and understanding in a way that helps them shape their views of the world. And in accepting the importance of reflecting on personal experiences and how they affect how we learn, students can join educators in seeing the improvement that flipped classrooms can have on student learning. So bringing it all together here, a flipped classroom, definitely worth a try for all the reasons listed and more, and the main one being that students can start to see how they learn and construct their knowledge accordingly.